When she first saw the small house at the end of Maple Street, she couldn't believe the price was real. The listing had been sitting online for weeks, maybe even months, and nobody seemed interested. The photos showed a place that looked tired and old, with peeling paint, sagging floors, and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. But something about it caught her attention. It wasn't perfect, but it looked like it had a story. Lena had been searching for a home for nearly a year. Every time she found something within her budget, it turned out to have too many problems, or it got snatched up by someone else before she could even make an offer. She was tired of renting small apartments and sharing thin walls with noisy neighbors. What she wanted most was a place where her 8-year-old son, Ethan, could have a yard to play in and a room of his own that didn't double as her workspace. When she called the real estate agent about the house, the woman laughed softly and said, "You're the first person to show serious interest. Most people take one look and walk away." Lena smiled. "I'm not most people. The house was almost 100 years old, built long before the modern homes that surrounded it. It had once belonged to a family who'd lived there for decades before moving away. The price was low, shockingly low, and that made her nervous. But the thought of finally having her own place was stronger than her doubts. The day she went to see it, the sky was gray, and the air smelled faintly of rain. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, and the old mailbox leaned forward as if bowing to her. The porch creaked under her feet, and she could see faded spots where the paint had long ago peeled away. Yet even with all its flaws, something about the place felt warm. It wasn't just a building. It felt like it had been waiting for someone to care about it again. Inside, the air was dusty, and the wooden floors groaned as she walked. The wallpaper had faded into dull patterns, and spiderwebs hung like lace from the corners, but sunlight spilled through the windows, landing softly on the worn-out furniture that had been left behind. The kitchen had an old cast-iron sink, and the small dining area overlooked a backyard full of tall grass and wildflowers. Ethan followed behind her, holding her hand. "Mom, is this really going to be our house?" he asked, his voice small but full of hope. "Maybe," she said, smiling. "What do you think?" He looked around and shrugged. "It's kind of spooky," she laughed. "A little bit, yeah, but I think we can make it nice." By the time they left, she had already made up her mind. The house needed work, sure, but it had potential. And more importantly, it was hers for a price she could actually afford. Her friends thought she was crazy. "You're buying that old place?" one of them asked over coffee. "You know what they say, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is." Lena just smiled. "Maybe, but I think it's worth the risk." The paperwork went through faster than she expected. Within a month, she was holding the keys, standing on that creaky porch again with Ethan by her side. She could almost feel the weight of all the years that had passed inside those walls, as if the house itself was exhaling after being silent for so long. The first few weeks were spent cleaning and planning. Every day after work, she'd come home, change into old clothes, and scrub away years of dust. She pulled down old curtains, patched up cracks in the walls, and swept away spider webs from every corner. The more she cleaned, the more she started to notice small, charming details, like the way the staircase curved gently at the bottom, or how the stained glass window above the front door scattered colors across the hallway when the sun hit it just right. Sometimes, she'd pause and just stand there looking around, imagining what the house must have been like when it was new, when laughter filled the rooms and the kitchen smelled like fresh bread. It made her feel connected to something bigger, as if the house had chosen her to bring it back to life. Still, not everything went smoothly. The plumbing was unreliable, and the electricity flickered at random moments. There were nights when she'd be reading in bed and the lights would suddenly go out, forcing her to find a flashlight and wait for them to come back on. And there was the basement, dark, damp, and colder than the rest of the house. She avoided it as much as possible, except when she needed to check the breaker box. Ethan hated the basement. He refused to go down there even during the day. "It smells weird," he said once. Like old things, Lena didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. It smelled like dust and time and something faintly metallic, but she figured that was just what old basements smelled like. Despite the challenges, she loved the house more every day. She began painting the walls light colors, fixing loose boards and replacing broken fixtures. She even planted flowers in the front yard, something she'd always wanted to do. Every improvement made it feel more like home. One evening, after a long day of sanding and painting, She sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a mix of pink and orange. Ethan played in the yard, chasing fireflies. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. The neighbors were friendly, too. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman from across the street, often stopped by to chat. "You're brave for buying that place," she said one afternoon, leaning on her cane. "It's been empty for years. People said it was haunted, but I never believed that nonsense. Just an old house that needed love, that's all." Lena smiled. "Well, I'm giving it plenty of that." Mrs. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Good. Maybe it'll finally start to feel alive again." As the weeks went by, Lena started to notice small things, like strange creaks at night, or a soft draft even when all the windows were closed. Sometimes, when she was in the kitchen, she'd hear faint tapping sounds coming from the floorboards below. She blamed it on pipes or settling wood, the kind of noises old houses always made. But one afternoon, while moving furniture in the living room, she noticed something unusual. Near the corner, one of the wooden floorboards looked slightly different from the rest. It was newer, less worn, and the nails were shiny compared to the others. She knelt down and ran her fingers over it. "That's odd," she murmured. Ethan, sitting nearby with a comic book, looked up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said, forcing a smile. "Just curious." She pressed lightly on the board, and it gave a little, like there was a small gap underneath. Probably a loose plank, she thought. She made a mental note to fix it later, but over the next few days she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time she walked across that spot, it made a faint hollow sound. It wasn't like the other boards, it felt empty underneath. Late one night, after Ethan had gone to bed, she brought a small flashlight and a screwdriver. She crouched beside the floorboard and carefully lifted one edge. It didn't move easily. The nails were old but firmly in place. She hesitated, then decided to stop. It was probably just her imagination, she told herself. She had more important things to worry about, like finishing the painting and fixing the plumbing. Still, that hollow sound stayed in her mind. The next morning, she called her brother, who worked as a handyman in another town. He promised to visit the following weekend to help with repairs. "Don't go ripping up the floors before I get there," he joked over the phone. "You might end up opening something you don't want to." Lena laughed. "You make it sound like a horror movie." "Hey, old houses have secrets," he said. "Just be careful." When she hung up, she looked around the room. The morning light was streaming through the windows, catching dust in the air. The house felt quiet, almost watchful. She shook off the thought and went back to work, humming softly to herself. She didn't know it yet, but the house really did have a secret waiting just beneath her feet. For now, though, she was simply happy. She had a home. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was enough. A week passed before her brother showed up, carrying a heavy toolbox and a grin that said he was ready to tackle anything. "So," he said, stepping inside, "where's this mysterious floorboard you've been talking about?" Lena pointed toward the corner of the living room. "Right there. It sounds hollow when you step on it. I thought it might be a loose plank, but it feels different." He knelt down, tapping a few boards with his knuckles. "You're right. This one's not sitting flat. Might be a bad repair job. Or something under it," she added, half joking. He chuckled. "Like what, buried treasure?" She smiled but didn't answer. They both knew she didn't really believe in things like that. Still, a tiny part of her hoped there was something interesting hidden below. He used a crowbar to lift the board carefully, trying not to crack the wood. When it finally came loose, a small puff of dust rose into the air. Beneath it was a layer of old fabric, almost like burlap, stretched tightly over something. "That's strange," he muttered. "There's a cover down here." Lena knelt beside him. "Is that insulation?" "Maybe, but why would someone patch insulation under one board?" He pulled back the edge of the fabric, revealing a small wooden compartment beneath the floor. It was no bigger than a suitcase, but deep enough to fit something sizable. Inside, there was nothing visible but darkness. Lena's heart started beating faster. "What is that?" "Let's find out," he said, shining his flashlight inside. The beam revealed an old rusted metal box, maybe the size of a shoebox. The lid was shut tight and the edges were lined with dust and cobwebs. "Looks like an old cash box," her brother said, pulling it out gently. The thing was heavier than it looked. Lena stared at it, unsure what to think. "How long do you think it's been there?" He shrugged. Could be 50 years, maybe more. This house is ancient. They placed the box on the coffee table, both of them just staring at it for a long moment. It was one of those quiet moments when the world seems to hold its breath. Finally, her brother said, "Well, are you going to open it or should I?" Lena hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. "What if there's something bad in there?" He smiled. "Then we'll deal with it. But come on, you have to look." She nodded and slowly lifted the rusty latch. It resisted at first, then gave way with a soft click. When she pulled the lid open, a faint smell of age and dust filled the room. Inside were bundles of something wrapped in old brown paper, tied with faded string. Each bundle was roughly the same size, stacked neatly. She picked one up carefully, untied the string, and peeled the paper open. Her breath caught. Inside were crisp old bills, hundreds of them. They looked real, though the paper felt thicker than modern money. Her brother leaned in, eyes wide. "Are those actual bills?" Lena nodded slowly. "I think so." He pulled one out and squinted at it. "These are from the 1930s, holy—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. This can't be real. There were at least 6 more bundles in the box, each one the same, filled with old currency. Some were in small denominations, others larger. She couldn't even begin to guess how much money was there. They sat in silence, both staring at the contents of the box like it might vanish if they blinked. Finally, her brother spoke again, his voice low. "You know what this means, right? Someone hid this, probably during the Great Depression or something." Lena ran a hand through her hair. "But why leave it behind?" He shrugged. "Maybe they died. Maybe they moved and forgot. Maybe they didn't trust banks." Lena looked around the room. The house suddenly felt different, heavier somehow. She had walked across that spot for weeks, never realizing something so valuable was sitting right under her feet. Her brother started laughing quietly, still staring at the money. "You bought this house for what? Half the market price?" "I think you just hit the jackpot," she smiled nervously. "Don't jinx it. I don't even know if this is real money." They spent the rest of the afternoon counting through a few bundles, trying to handle everything gently. The bills were fragile, but the print and serial numbers were still clear. Some of them were in denominations she'd never seen before. "I think you should get these checked by someone," her brother said finally. "An appraiser or maybe a bank," Lena nodded. "Yeah, but let's not tell anyone else yet, okay?" He agreed. They rewrapped everything neatly, placed it back in the box, and slid it under the couch for safekeeping. The next morning, Lena could hardly think about anything else. Every time she walked past that corner of the room, she felt a strange mix of excitement and disbelief. At work, she kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until she could go home and look at it again. She didn't tell anyone, not her friends, not her coworkers. The secret felt too big, too unreal. That evening, she called a local antique shop to ask if they knew anyone who could authenticate old currency. The shop owner, an older man named Mr. Harlan, said he'd been collecting vintage bills and coins for decades. He offered to take a look if she could bring a few samples. The next day, she carefully selected 2 of the least damaged bills, placed them in a plastic sleeve, and drove to the shop. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The place smelled like dust and old books. Mr. Harlan was a thin man with silver hair and round glasses. He greeted her with a warm smile, then studied the bills under a magnifying lamp. After a long moment, he looked up, his expression somewhere between shock and awe. "These are real," he said softly. "And they're in remarkably good condition." Lena felt her heart skip. "Real? Like really valuable?" He nodded. "Some of these old bills, especially from that era, can be worth far more than their printed value. Depending on the rarity, collectors will pay thousands for a single piece." "And you say you found these in your home?" "Yes," she said. "Hidden under the floor." He leaned back in his chair, still holding one of the bills. "Well, young lady, you might have stumbled onto something quite special." She thanked him, took the bills back, and drove home in silence, her thoughts spinning. Could it really be true? Could that box actually be worth more than her entire house? When she got home, Ethan was playing in the yard, chasing their cat around the grass. She watched him for a moment, thinking how strange life could be. She had bought the house because it was cheap, a bargain that most people ignored. And now it might hold something that could change everything. That night, after Ethan went to bed, she sat on the couch and opened the box again. The bills were still there, perfectly still, waiting. She ran her fingers lightly across the bundles, her mind full of questions. Who had put this here? Why hide it so carefully? And why had no one ever come back for it? As she was putting the box away, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint metal glint at the bottom corner. She lifted a few bundles aside and found a smaller tin container wedged underneath. It was flatter and more corroded, but it too was sealed tight. Her breath quickened. She pried it open gently with a screwdriver. Inside were several small cloth pouches, each tied with string. She opened one and gasped softly. Inside were coins. Silver, some gold-colored, some so old she couldn't even read the dates. She picked one up and turned it in the light. The details were still sharp, the faces and lettering clear. She didn't know much about coins, but even she could tell these weren't ordinary pocket change. There was no denying it now. This was more than just forgotten money. Whoever had owned this house decades ago had hidden something precious, something worth protecting. She sat there for a long time, staring at the open box on the floor. The quiet of the house felt almost alive, like the walls were whispering secrets she couldn't yet understand. Finally, she whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" The only answer was the faint creak of the old wooden beams above her head. She closed the box again, this time locking it in her bedroom closet. She knew she would have to make careful decisions, find out exactly what she had discovered, how much it was worth, and what she should do about it. But one thing was certain. Her bargain home wasn't just an old fixer-upper anymore. It had a story to tell, and she was just beginning to uncover it. After discovering the hidden box of money, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting to be uncovered. The discovery had turned her world upside down, and even though she'd tried to keep things quiet, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the possibilities. The coins, the old bills, they were real. The appraiser at the antique shop had confirmed that much. He'd mentioned that some of the bills, especially the ones from the 1930s, were incredibly rare and could fetch a small fortune, but the more she thought about it, the more questions piled up in her mind. Who had left all this here, and why? Lena had never believed in conspiracy theories or hidden treasures, but now she found herself thinking about all the stories she had read about buried wealth, secret compartments in old houses, and the things people left behind. She wanted to know the truth. Who had been here before her? Her curiosity got the best of her. She started digging through local records, trying to find any trace of the previous owners. The house had been built nearly a century ago, and she knew that the family who had lived here must have had a history. But nothing she found seemed to match the story she was imagining. There were no news stories about missing people or unsolved mysteries in the area. The people who had lived there were listed in the public records as an elderly couple who had passed away in the late 1950s. Their names didn't ring any bells, but their quiet lives didn't give any hint that they were involved in something more than ordinary. She spent hours online, searching for old newspapers and public archives. Eventually, she came across a name that stood out, an antiques dealer from the 1940s who had worked in the area. According to the records, this man had been well known, at least in local circles, for his collection of rare and expensive items. He'd run a small antique shop in town, but when his wife died, he closed up shop and moved away. The authorities had never been able to track him down, and there had been rumors that he had disappeared under strange circumstances. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be? Could the antiques dealer have hidden the money, and if so, why leave it under her floor? She spent the next few days trying to track down more information, reaching out to anyone who might know more about this mysterious figure. It took a while, but eventually she found a few people who remembered him. The more they talked, the more a story began to form, one that was stranger and more intriguing than she could have imagined. According to one of the older locals, the antiques dealer had been obsessed with rare items. He'd collected everything from coins to paintings to strange artifacts. But the man had become paranoid in his later years. Some said he'd heard rumors about thieves targeting collectors like him, and as his wealth grew, so did his fear. He started talking about hiding things away, precious things that no one could find. It seemed he had grown so obsessed with the idea of protecting his treasures that he had started hiding them in various places around his house, even burying them in the backyard. At first, Lena wasn't sure if she believed all of it, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. Maybe the old man had left the money behind because he hadn't trusted anyone. Maybe he had been afraid of losing it. But why hide it under the floor in the living room? Why leave it for someone else to find, especially in a house that had sat empty for so many years? The more questions she asked, the more answers she got, but the answers only led to more questions. She felt like she was piecing together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Lena decided to go to the town library. There, she hoped she might find some old news stories or even personal accounts that could shed more light on the antiques dealer's past. The library was small, but it was full of history. Shelves of old books lined the walls, and the air smelled like paper and dust. Lena spent hours flipping through local newspapers and old records. At first, it seemed like nothing out of the ordinary, until she stumbled upon an article from the 1950s. The headline read, "Antiques Dealer Disappears Without a Trace." It was a short article, just a few paragraphs, but it mentioned something interesting. The antiques dealer had been under investigation for selling counterfeit items. The article stated that the authorities had been unable to catch him in the act, but rumors had circulated that he had sold fake coins and paintings to unsuspecting buyers. Lena's heart raced as she read further. The article didn't mention much else, but it did hint that the antiques dealer's disappearance wasn't entirely voluntary. There had been talk of threats made against him, of shady deals gone wrong, and of people looking for something he'd been hiding. Could this be why he had hidden all those valuables? Maybe he had been hiding not just money, but evidence of his crimes. Maybe he had feared for his life. Lena closed the book and sat back in the chair, her mind spinning. It seemed like everything was connected, but she still didn't know how. The money, the coins, the hidden compartment, it all had to mean something. The question was what? When she got home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to uncovering the truth. She called her brother again, eager to tell him what she had learned. "So here's the thing," she started, pacing the living room. "I found out who used to live here, a guy who ran an antique shop. He was well known in town, but then he disappeared. Turns out he was in some trouble with the law. And I think he was hiding something in this house." Her brother listened quietly on the other end. "You think that box was his?" Lena hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think that he was hiding not just the money, but maybe more. Maybe it was all part of some bigger plan to protect himself." "Okay, so what's the next step?" he asked. "Are you going to tell someone? The police, maybe?" Lena frowned. "I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out if it's worth telling them. What if it was just a mistake? What if this whole thing gets blown out of proportion? I'm not sure what to do yet." Her brother was silent for a moment. "Whatever you decide, just be careful. This doesn't sound like something you want to get mixed up in." "I know," she said, "but I can't stop now. I need to know what happened here. This place, it's more than just a house now." After the call, Lena spent the rest of the evening going through the old floorboards again, searching for more clues. She carefully lifted the floorboards, trying not to disturb anything, but found nothing else of note. It felt like the house was quiet again, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for her to find what was hidden beneath the surface. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena found herself visiting the library more often, digging deeper into the history of the antiques dealer. She found that he had owned several properties around town, though most of them had been sold off after his disappearance. There were whispers about hidden treasures, but no one had ever been able to prove it. One afternoon, Lena met with the antique shop owner again, this time bringing a few of the rare coins for him to examine. He was just as shocked as before, but this time he seemed more intrigued than concerned. "You've got something special here, that's for sure," he said, holding a coin up to the light. "But I still don't understand why someone would hide this in a house like yours." "It doesn't add up," Lena bit her lip. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think that this wasn't just some random hiding place. Whoever left this was trying to keep it safe. Maybe they were trying to keep it from being found," he suggested. "But for what reason?" That was the question that kept echoing in Lena's mind. For what reason? What was it that the antiques dealer had been trying to protect? And more importantly, why had it ended up in her house? Lena couldn't stop thinking about the coins, the money, and the man who had hidden them all under her floor. Every day felt like a new twist in an old mystery, but each answer only brought up more questions. Who had this man been, and why had he chosen her house to hide everything? She kept thinking about how strange it all seemed. How someone who had lived in the house before her could have so carefully stashed away their wealth. And if that wasn't strange enough, there was the growing sense that someone might still be watching. A few weeks had passed since the discovery. She had taken the coins and bills to an expert who had told her that many of them were worth far more than she could have imagined. Some of the rare coins alone could bring in a fortune. But it wasn't just the money that weighed on her mind. It was the thought that she was living in a house with a history she knew nothing about. A history full of hidden secrets. That afternoon, she sat down with a notebook and started making a list of everything she had learned so far. She sketched out a timeline, noting the old antique dealer's rise and fall, his mysterious disappearance, and the odd things people had said about him. The more she wrote, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to come together, but still something didn't feel right. There was a part of the story that wasn't adding up. Lena needed to find out more. She decided it was time to go back to the town library and dig deeper into the antique dealer's past. Maybe there was something she had missed. Maybe there were more clues hidden in the old town records. She drove to the library the next morning, the cool air of early autumn filling her lungs as she walked up the steps. The library was almost empty when she arrived, the scent of aging books and dust surrounding her. The librarian gave her a polite nod as she passed, but no one paid much attention. Lena headed straight for the local history section, where she had spent hours before. As she flipped through a few more old newspapers, something caught her eye. It was a small, forgotten article tucked away in a corner of a page. The headline read, "Antique Dealer's Collection Found in Abandoned House." Lena's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the information she had been looking for. She read the article carefully. It was a brief story, barely more than a few sentences, but it mentioned something that took her by surprise. A portion of the antiques dealer's collection had been found in an abandoned house just outside of town. The report didn't go into details, but it mentioned that the house had been empty for years before a new owner had moved in and discovered the items. Could this be the same house? Could the house she now lived in have once been the hiding place for this man's entire collection? Lena stared at the page, her mind racing. If this article was right, it meant the antiques dealer hadn't just hidden money under the floor. He had hidden an entire collection of valuable items. And this collection might still be scattered around the house waiting to be found. She immediately felt the need to go back to her house and search every inch of it again. What if there was more hidden in the walls or the attic? What if this house really was full of treasures just waiting for someone to discover? With her heart racing, Lena left the library and drove home. She didn't waste any time. As soon as she stepped inside, she started searching. She checked the floorboards again, tapping on every one of them, trying to listen for any hint of something hidden beneath. She checked the attic, the basement, even the closet spaces. But no matter how hard she searched, there was nothing more. The house was old, and parts of it creaked and groaned, but it didn't give up any more secrets. Frustrated, she sat down on the old couch, running her hands through her hair. Why? She whispered to herself. Why did he leave so much money? And why just here? The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the old beams above her. Then, as she sat there, she remembered something that made her blood run cold. The coins and bills had all been hidden under the floor in a compartment. But what if the dealer had hidden something else in the house, something he didn't want anyone to find? The thought stuck with her. What if the money wasn't all he had hidden? What if there was something more dangerous? Something that could explain why the dealer had gone into hiding? She couldn't stop herself now. She had to find out. She had to know if there was something else in the house. Something more than just old coins and cash. Lena decided to go back to the antique shop one more time. She needed answers, and maybe the owner of the shop could help her make sense of what was happening. The man had been around for years and knew more about rare items than anyone else. Maybe he knew more about the antiques dealer's collection than he had let on. The antique shop was busier than usual when Lena arrived. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, and the familiar smell of dust and old wood greeted her. The shopkeeper, an older man with graying hair, smiled at her when she walked in. "Back for more, I see," he said. "What can I do for you?" Lena wasted no time. "I need to know everything you can tell me about the antiques dealer who used to live around here." "The one who disappeared?" The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting slightly. "That's a name I haven't heard in years. What's got you interested in him?" Lena paused for a moment, considering her words. She didn't want to come off as too eager, but she needed the truth. "I think I found some of his collection. There's money hidden in my house, old bills, coins. And I think there's more hidden there. I need to know if you know anything about his collection." The shopkeeper looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. That man was no saint, let me tell you. He had an obsession with rare items, and he wasn't shy about getting his hands on them. Some people even thought he was involved in some illegal deals. "You say you found money in your house?" "That doesn't surprise me. He could have hidden anything." Lena leaned forward. "But why hide it there?"
"Why under my floor?"
The shopkeeper's face darkened and he glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening. "I'll tell you something," he said in a low voice. Some of the things he collected were valuable, but some of it was dangerous. There were rumors that he was hiding things that weren't just rare but dangerous, items that people would kill for. You understand what I'm saying? Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What kind of things?" The shopkeeper looked around again before speaking. "Artifacts, antiquities, items that people believe have power. If you're asking about why he would hide something like that, well, I don't think he trusted anyone, not even himself. The rumors say that the more he got into his collection, the more paranoid he became. He believed that certain things were cursed, maybe even dangerous." Lena's mind reeled. Cursed artifacts? Dangerous items? It all sounded like something out of a thriller novel, but the way the shopkeeper was speaking made it seem all too real. "You're saying that I could have something dangerous in my house?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The shopkeeper's eyes were heavy with concern. "I'm not saying you have it, but there's a chance. If he thought something was too valuable to fall into the wrong hands, he would have hidden it in a place no one would think to look. If I were you, I'd be careful." The weight of his words hung over her like a storm cloud. Dangerous artifacts? Cursed items? It sounded absurd, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that it was true. Something had been hidden in her house for a reason, and it was her job to figure out what that reason was before it was too late. The next few days felt like a blur to Lena. After her conversation with the shopkeeper, everything began to feel heavier, like the house itself was pressing down on her. The idea of cursed artifacts, dangerous items, things that people would kill for, had planted a seed of unease deep within her. She couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that whatever the antiques dealer had hidden in the house was far more than just money. If it was true, if something dangerous was buried in the walls or hidden beneath the floorboards, then she had to find it before someone else did. She spent sleepless nights pacing the house, her mind racing with questions. What could be hidden here? How had the dealer managed to hide it for so long without anyone discovering it? And most terrifying of all, why had it ended up in her hands? The house was older than she'd originally thought. She had never paid much attention to the small details before. Creaking floorboards, hidden compartments, the strange arrangement of the rooms. But now they all felt like clues. Every time she passed through the hallway or opened a door, her senses were on high alert. She was no longer just a homeowner. She was a detective, piecing together fragments of a story that had been left unfinished for decades. Lena knew she had to go further than just searching the obvious places. The attic was large and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. She had already checked the basement, the closets, and the floors, but the attic was a different world altogether, a place that hadn't seen much attention in years. She grabbed a flashlight and a thick pair of gloves and headed up the creaky stairs. The moment she stepped into the attic, a musty smell hit her, and the air felt thick with dust. There were stacks of old furniture, faded curtains, and boxes piled high, each one sealed shut with years of forgotten memories. She started sifting through the boxes, pulling open old trunks and flipping through stacks of papers. For hours, she found nothing but old family photographs, yellowed letters, and random trinkets. It was the kind of stuff most people would toss away after a few generations. But then something caught her eye. In the corner, partly hidden behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a small weathered chest. It was locked, the metal hinges rusted with age. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had been searching for something like this. Something out of place, something that felt important. The chest was just as old as the house, and there was a strange pull about it that she couldn't ignore. Without thinking, she grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. Inside, she found a collection of old papers, strange symbols, and what appeared to be an ancient book. The pages were delicate, covered in faded ink that had long since lost its vibrancy. But what caught her eye was the item sitting at the bottom of the chest. It was a small, intricately carved box, no bigger than a shoe, but it had a strange, almost otherworldly quality about it. The carving seemed to move slightly as she stared at them, the shapes shifting in a way that was impossible to explain. Lena hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure what to make of the box. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. Everything she had heard about the antiques dealer, the whispers of hidden treasures, cursed artifacts, things that people would kill for, rushed back to her. This box was no ordinary trinket. It was the kind of thing that belonged in a museum, or perhaps locked away in a vault. But here it was in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch it. As soon as her skin made contact with the box, she felt a strange warmth spread up her arm. It wasn't physical warmth, but something deeper, almost as if the box had a life of its own. She pulled her hand away quickly, her breath catching in her throat. It was too much to think about, too much to process. She needed help. Lena knew she couldn't handle this alone. But who could she trust with something like this? She didn't want to get the authorities involved. After all, what would she even say? I found a cursed box in my attic? No, that wasn't going to work. Her first instinct was to call the antique shop owner again, but something held her back. She didn't know if she could trust him, especially after everything he had said. What if he had known more than he let on? What if he had a hand in the dealer's mysterious disappearance? No, she had to be careful. Instead, she decided to reach out to someone else. She remembered an old friend of hers who had worked in a museum and had an interest in ancient artifacts. He had always been fascinated by history, and if anyone could help her make sense of what she had found, it was him. She called him and explained everything. About the house, the hidden money, and now the strange box she had discovered. He was skeptical at first, but agreed to meet her. The moment he saw the box, his face changed. He was no longer the easygoing friend she had known. His eyes widened and he took a cautious step back. What is this? He asked, his voice low and filled with awe. I don't know, Lena replied. I thought maybe you could help me figure it out. The antiques dealer. I think he was hiding things, dangerous things. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the box as if it were some kind of riddle he couldn't solve. Finally, he spoke. This is incredible. I've seen similar items in museums, but this is different. It's old, ancient. But it's not just a relic. This is something special. Lena's heart raced. What do you mean special? Is it dangerous? Her friend swallowed, his brow furrowed in thought. There are stories about objects like this, things that were made centuries ago, passed down through generations. Some believe they have powers that can affect people, change them. Others think they're cursed. Lena felt a cold shiver run through her. Could it be true? Could this box be something cursed? Had the antiques dealer hidden it here in her house because he feared what it might do? I don't know what to do with this, Lena whispered. I don't want to keep it, but I don't know who I can trust with it. Her friend stared at the box for a long moment, deep in thought. You need to be careful, he said finally. Whoever owned this object before you clearly didn't want it to be found. And now that you have it, well, you're in danger, whether you realize it or not. Lena felt a sick feeling in her stomach. She had no idea what she was dealing with, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever was hidden in her house, it was no ordinary treasure. It was something dark, something powerful, and now it was hers. She had no choice but to figure out what to do with it. Her friend offered to take the box for further study, but Lena hesitated. I can't just let it go, not yet. I need to know everything about it. I understand, he said, but be careful. There's no telling what might happen if you keep it in your possession too long. Lena nodded, but in her heart she knew the truth. She had stumbled upon something that could change her life forever. And the more she learned, the more she realized. Whatever was hidden under her floorboards was just the beginning. There was so much more to uncover, and every step she took brought her closer to something far bigger than she could ever have imagined.